Well, Senator Rand Paul has been elected 3 times by the people of Kentucky to serve as United States Senator. He has staked out principled positions on civil liberties, responsible government spending, and he is fearless in taking on government bureaucrats who refuse accountability for the taxpayers' money that they spend. He's even faced violent attempts on his life since becoming a senator. He was present at the ball field when a Bernie Sanders activist shot Congressman Steve Scalise and others. He was physically attacked while walking on the streets of Washington during the 2020 Republican convention. And in the most serious attempt, he was jumped from behind while working in his own yard by a radical leftist neighbor whose cowardly, unprovoked attack almost killed him. Senator Rand Paul took on Dr. Anthony Fauci when others were afraid to do so. He was not afraid. And to prove that he's not afraid of anything, he showed up here at this show. Would you please welcome one of the very best, Senator Rand Paul. You know, one of the things that I've admired about you, you don't do what people expect people to do in Washington. You're not a wholly owned subsidiary of the donor class. And I find that really refreshing, Senator.
You know, I actually had a real job before I went to Washington, and I always tell people I'm not afraid to be unelected. I'm not afraid to go back to my town, which is about an hour from here, and go back to practicing medicine. In fact, sometimes I miss it. In medicine, you actually can accomplish something. You have a cataract, I can remove it, you see better. In Washington, there's a lot of vision problems, but very few of them are fixable.
You know, well, that's very true. A lot of people don't realize you were a practicing ophthalmologist and have continued to practice and do mission work when you're out of the Senate and taking recess. A lot of people go and just do fundraisers. And I've known of you going to third world countries and providing surgeries for people that couldn't afford it. I think it's a very admirable way to keep connected with folks.
We had a great group of people from the University of Utah. Alan Crandall led the team, and I went on a trip to Guatemala with them. We went to Haiti with them, and then I had another trip to Trinidad and Tobago, and we were all set to go, and then unfortunately I had to have part of my lung taken out from that assault.
Yeah.
And but I've enjoyed it, and probably there's nothing more rewarding than seeing the look on someone's face, you know, that hasn't been able to see. In our country, most of the time, you have blurry vision, you can't read as well, and you have your cataracts removed, and most people do well. In most of the third world, they have their cataracts removed when they're blind. Mm-hmm. These people are brought in, they're carried in, they walk with a cane for those who aren't sighted. They are essentially blind from cataracts, but most of them can get their vision back. And to see the look on someone's face who hasn't been able to see sometimes for years to get their vision back is probably nothing more rewarding than that I've done in my life. Really.
What a contrast. You go to places like that, you help people to see. You go to Washington, and there people are willingly blind most of the time to what's going on in the economy.
Yeah, and some people in Washington, some of my colleagues think that we can change Washington with the people who are there. You can't. Yeah. You got to send us new people. You got to send us better people because the people there aren't convincible.
Yeah.
But you need to realize that the problem isn't just Republican versus Democrat. I'll often go to the floor. I was on the floor last night introducing an amendment to cut spending, and I'll say the debt is now $33 trillion. Whose fault is it? Republicans? Yes. Democrats? Yes. It's both parties.
Yeah.
They want to spend it on different things, but they're not willing to just spend what comes in. But you're exactly right. State governments all do it. Your local city government does it. And interestingly, in the European Union, we think of these countries as big welfare states and socialist states, much more liberal and bigger government than we have. Most of the countries in the European Union balance their annual budgets. So we've got a real problem.
I want us to get into, you've got a brand new book. It's called Deception, The Great COVID Cover-Up. This may be one of the most important books that's going to come out this year. And the reason I say that is because every single American was affected by COVID. Whether they got COVID or not wasn't the point. They couldn't go to church. They couldn't go shopping in many of the stores they were used to. They were not allowed to even have a funeral for a loved one, couldn't do weddings. Our whole culture was disrupted. And in this book, you do an extraordinary level of research in pointing out that, in a nutshell, we were lied to.
Yeah, this was, in the beginning, I thought maybe they were just telling us the truth. The scientists came forward and they said, this came from nature. But the more we learned about what they were saying in private, they were saying the opposite. In private, they were saying, oh my goodness, it looks like the virus has been manipulated. Oh my goodness, we know it came from a lab in Wuhan where they're doing gain-of-function research. But in public, Anthony Fauci stares me down and says, no, the NIH has never, ever funded gain-of-function research. But it was a lie. And we know it was a lie because he actually in private was saying the opposite thing. And so, you sometimes wonder, how do you keep doing this? So I fly up to Washington on Monday. I come back at the end of the week. I've been married for 33 years. My wife meets me at the door, and you think, well, maybe I'll get a hug and a kiss and slippers. You know what she says when she opens the door?
What's that?
She says, how come Anthony Fauci's not in jail yet? So I've got to keep trying.
Yeah.
But I have sent 2 referrals to Merrick Garland. So far, I haven't heard much back. But
I'm shocked that he hasn't responded to you.
Lying to Congress is a felony.
Yeah.
It's punishable up to 5 years in prison. And I think what worries people the most as I travel around the country is people come up to me and say, I'm worried that there's 2 tiers of justice.
Yeah.
That there's no longer equal protection under the law. And equal protection is a big deal. I mean, we had civil strife in the 60s because there was a problem. We weren't treating people the same under the law based on the color of their skin. It was a big thing that almost led to the destruction of our country. And we got better. We got over it. We treat people fairly now in the court system. But now I'm worried that it's not just the color of your skin, it's the shade of your ideology. Do you homeschool your kids? Are you a Christian? Do you support certain political candidates? And if you do, is there a possibility that you're going to be arrested? So I really think that you've got to have the same justice. You can't treat people who worked in the Trump administration one way and then treat people who are in this administration and they just look the other way. It's a real problem.
Senator, one of the reasons that what you're talking about in this book has not been well known is because social media companies and the media, they've covered up for Fauci, covered up for the bureaucrats in the public health world.
I think one of the most startling things that I learned in researching the book, and my wife also helped me with the book, is that the cover-up was so pervasive. It wasn't just Anthony Fauci. It's him and a host of scientists. They're talking back and forth. One of them is a guy from England named Jeremy Farrar. He's sort of the Anthony Fauci of England. And there are discussions with he and his wife. He says he gets 17 phone calls in one night. The phone calls go on into the night. And as they're going back and forth, his wife says, you need to talk to your brother and inform him in case something happens to you. But he never really explains what's going to happen to him. If you think it came from nature, what is the problem? They're assuming that it came from the lab and that if it's revealed, maybe there'll be a danger, I assume, from Chinese spies, the Chinese government, who knows? He buys a burner phone. It's all this secretive stuff. Half the people involved in giving these science grants used to work in the intel community. The head of Jeremy Farrar's committee, Wellcome Trust in England, is a former MI5 intelligence head. There are spooks, American and foreign, throughout this whole thing. The problem with this research is it's called dual use. They say, oh, it's just for civilian purposes. We're just developing vaccines. Or maybe secretly, we're also developing it as a weapon. I actually think the best explanation is that the Chinese were trying to develop a vaccine, not a weapon, and that this escaped accidentally. But we actually know that the first 3 people that got the virus got it in November of 2019. They worked in the lab for the famous bat scientist, Dr. Shi, and we know when they got sick. We actually know their names. But the Chinese government covered this up in the very beginning. And even as late as January, 3 months later, when it's rip-roaring, the hospitals are full, people are sick all over Wuhan, they're saying, oh, it's not really transmittable between humans. They were lying about that late. But then 2 weeks later, the Chinese have a vaccine. And people are like, how do you get a vaccine in 2 weeks? 2 months later, the guy that invented the vaccine falls. He takes a fall from the 11th story of a building. We don't know whether he jumped or was pushed. All of this is just happening in China. But then it gets to our country, and I'm like, we're the land of the free. We're the land of liberty and transparency. We'll explore this. Then the cover-up begins in our country. Understandable in a totalitarian country of China that this would be covered up. But the cover-up in our country was so pervasive that it involved at least 8 different departments of government and hundreds of people. And people say, oh, yeah, right, how do hundreds of people? No way, 100 people. I think George Carlin explained it best, the comedian George Carlin. I see you remember who George Carlin was.
I certainly do.
But George Carlin explained it this way. He said, conspiracy theories are not necessary where interests converge. What is the interest? The interest to cover up is if you funded research in China, you don't want anybody to know you did. Because the research was dangerous. It went around a safety committee. There was a safety committee established that was supposed to examine whether or not this was dangerous or not. Never went to the committee. They went around it. How do they do that? Only with Anthony Fauci's permission. And Anthony Fauci gave his opinion on this way back in 2012. He said, yes, a pandemic could occur from this research, but if it does, the knowledge will be worth the risk. And
wow.
He was so wrong.
You confronted him in Senate hearings. I remember it was so courageous and so blunt. And I thought, God bless Rand Paul for not just sitting back and saying, well, I know that everybody meant well. But there were people who died that might have been helped by some of the modalities like ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine, and doctors were told they'd lose their license if they used it. Or
natural immunity. We've known about natural immunity since 400 BC in the Athenian plague. They knew to seclude people who were sick and stay away from people who were sick. We knew about natural immunity. They knew if you had gotten sick that you didn't get it again, or if you did, it was a lesser form. George Washington knew about natural immunity. When Martha wanted to visit him in the camps, he said, Martha, you can't come until you've been inoculated for smallpox. But he didn't take it. Why? Because he had pox on his face. He had smallpox when he was 15. You didn't need to get vaccinated if you'd already had it. But we didn't recognize that, and they poo-pooed it. But it could have saved lives. For example, when there was no vaccine and there's a nursing home, who would you want to be the nurses in the nursing home to protect your parents from getting it? People have already recovered. So you could have easily rotated in and out and put nurses in the nursing homes that had already gotten COVID. I called up President Trump on this, and I called up the doctors in the White House, and I said, put the Secret Service agents around President Trump, the ones who've already had it. Because a lot of people get it, and young people were getting it, and they were getting over it 2 weeks later. Now they're protected. They could protect the president. They could protect the elderly. None of it was done because Anthony Fauci says, oh, we just don't know about this natural immunity thing. Well, we've known about it for 2,000 years.
You know, I think part of what has been so frustrating is the lies, the cover-ups that have happened, and the fact that in all of this, it was more about controlling Americans rather than protecting us. And I wonder, were they just trying to test to see how willing we were to just follow instructions no matter how much they violated our basic civil liberties?
It was never about the science. It was about submission. In our state, the governor shut the churches down on Easter Sunday. They sent government agents to take the license plates of people going to church. And a brave federal judge that I voted to confirm, Justin Walker, wrote, he said, the miracle and the mystery of Jesus Christ is not something the government can prevent you from partaking in.
God bless him and you. This is an important book. I hope you get a copy of it. It's called Deception, the Great COVID Cover-Up. It's easy to respect Senator Rand Paul as one of the most principled members of the world's most exclusive club. This book, Deception, the Great COVID Cover-Up, is available right now, and you should get it and learn more about how he is standing up for your liberty. Even if you don't live in Kentucky, he still is. I hope you'll go to Huckabee.tv. We have all the links to Senator Paul and how to get the book. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I hope you will now. The button is just below this video, and there's a little bell next to it. If you click on those, YouTube will reluctantly start letting you know when we've got a new video uploaded.